Everyone, welcome to Pinot and Policy, where we have conversations about government policy, politics, with some wine and levity mixed in. Your hosts, Rafe D'Amico and Eric Settle. We are a Boomer and a Gen Xer, trying to find common ground on differences and explore some interesting topics together. We hope to have civil discourse on what at times can be contentious topics so that we can have a better understanding of each other and the varying perspectives in the US and the world writ large. Eric, we have a very special guest today. This is our first guest. We've got a guest on Pinot and Policy.
That's right. Episode number 14. Once you get through 13 episodes, you feel like you can expand. And it's really great to have today an old friend of mine, John Shames. John is hey, John, how you doing today?
Great to see you guys. Honored to be the first guest.
Thank you. And we didn't just have any guests, because John is a retired partner from E&Y. He was the U.S. head of private equity. He was also the global geostrategic business leader. He now serves as an advisor to a major consulting firm and serves on two public company boards. So we have really upped our game, Rafe. We have actual talent in the studio.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous about what we're going to say and talk about. I'm just going to kind of leave it to you and John to do most of the talking, I think.
All right, well, that sounds good. So, we've got, since we had I thought I brought a boomer with me. Let's talk a little about what we're going to talk about today. John is from Great Falls, Virginia. So we've asked him to come in and talk a little bit about with Election Day behind us, talk a little bit about what happened in the Virginia governor's race, and also to contrast it with what happened in New York, to see what's a harbinger for the future. We're then going to see whether the results of the election have gotten under the skin of the president and has made him start to act in a way that is, I don't know, more normal, more presidential. We don't know. There's many issues, but we'll talk about that. Then we'll also stop and we'll talk a little bit about what happened with the Pennsylvania budget now that the federal government's open. And then finally, we're going to have to spend a little more time talking about wine. We're not going to talk about Pinot, although John's going to talk about his trip to Sicily and is going to identify for us the sort of the Pinot of that great island of Sicily. Why don't we get started?
All right. So, we had two recent outcomes from local elections, whether it was the Virginia governor race or the New York mayoral race. Pretty sound victories by the Democratic Party on both sides. Is this a harbinger of what's to come? Is this a blue wave coming, or is this just like politics in those specific areas and business as usual?
Well, John, give us some ideas about that Virginia governor's race. It was, Abigail Spanberger, former congressman, former CIA, part of a class of women that include Mikey Sherrill, the governor-elect of New Jersey, Alyssa Slotkin, now very much a leader in the United States Senate for Michigan. Talk a little about what you saw, and were there things about that race that make it not a harbinger, or maybe it is?
Yeah, so look, it was not a surprise that Spanberger won. I don't think there was any expectation that the Republican, Winsome Sears, would be a good challenger at all. I think what was surprising was the margin. It was a 57%, a 15% margin. The polls were coming in at 8, 10, maybe even high as 12, but 15 was surprising. And in fact, what happened was she was able to help the other races. There was a contentious race, if that's the right word, with the Attorney General, where Jay Jones ended up winning 53 to 47, but which was a bit surprising given that he had texts out there from 22 supporting the shooting of a Republican state legislator. He subsequently apologized, but there was at least talk that was going to have an impact and drag her down. It clearly didn't. And maybe her coattails were longest in the state races, where the House of Delegates, which has always been razor-thin margin, it was Republican for a while, and then it's been Democrat for a bit more, but the Democrats are now 64 to 35 up in that, and so they're up 13 seats. They gained 13 seats, I should say. Everyone was up in this election. And the state Senate is just 21 and 19, so it's pretty close. So she really had some great coattails. Glenn Youngkin, who was the outgoing governor, was a very, I would say popular governor. There hasn't been that many polls out lately, but the last one that I saw showed that he had a 59% approval rating. How many people today have a 59% approval rating?
Right.
But what you've seen is that, in a way that they look at this as a bellwether election, just like New Jersey, because it's coming a year after the presidential election, and in many cases, just like this year, a person of the other party won. And the last time, frankly, that a Republican has won the state race was 2009, before Youngkin. So Democrats were in control for a while. So not a surprise that Democrats are back. I think that we're going to see what kind of governor she will be. She clearly has staked her reputation as a centrist, as a moderate, as someone who is focused on her military background and a reputation for pragmatic problem solving. She ran a race very conservatively, in my mind, in that she was focused on affordability. She was focusing on the impact of the DOGE cuts to government employees who lived in Virginia, as well as a little bit of the government shutdown. She stayed completely away from cultural issues, raised a lot of money, and so at the end of the day, I don't know how much of a harbinger this is of anything that wasn't really, it really wasn't expected that this would change. She was going to win. It's just a question of how much. Is it a question that people were upset with Trump? Clearly, there's a piece of that. Were they happy with a moderate? There's clearly a piece of that also. And people were upset with affordability, which is something she focused on. So, again, not a surprise, but to me, very different outcome than the New York City mayoral race.
Right. I guess the question is, it sounded like the Republican candidate really was a weak candidate, and there was no primary for her. She I guess ran unopposed to the Republican nomination. It's surprising to me because in a state like Virginia, where there are an awful lot of talented business executives like Glenn Youngkin, I'm surprised that no Republican wanted to kind of step up and challenge her.
Well, she was the lieutenant governor. She was supported by Youngkin. One thing I didn't mention was she was not supported by Trump at all,
okay.
Which had to be an effect, for him not coming out and supporting her. But I think he viewed her as a weak candidate, and as a result, he probably was concerned about supporting a weak candidate. So there hasn't been that many others that I can think of who have kind of come to the forefront of Virginia who would be a Republican candidate. So it doesn't surprise me. A lot of the races had very little primaries, and Spanberger ran unopposed also.
Okay, that's interesting. So it was interesting. So we shift a little bit. We slide through New Jersey, and obviously in New Jersey, there was also again Mikey Sherrill beat Jack Citarelli, and again that was a surprising result again because of the numbers. New Jersey is a bluish state, but it also had, Phil Murphy had been governor for 8 years, and the feeling was there might be a shift away. But again, kind of a very talented, in her case, a former Navy pilot, really an interesting candidate. And I think that those kind of centrist Democrats are where I think the Democratic Party, should be going if they're going to attract sort of national attention. Rafe, what do you think?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to really get an idea of what that means, right? Because you hear a lot of pundits saying that if Democrats think that what happened in Virginia and specifically what happened in the New York mayoral race is the playbook for 2026 and even more so the playbook for 2028, then they feel like they are sorely mistaken and they will get wiped out. And especially in a market like New York City, it's an incredibly unique market that has a lot of vectors influencing it at the same time, right? In New York City, you've got, just look at the amount of young women that voted for Mondami, right? 85% of young women voted for him, and for very specific reasons. And I think I think it's a stretch to say that you're going to see that play out across the country writ large, because dynamics change. We've got a very diverse landscape, and just like real estate is incredibly local, politics is incredibly local too.
Yeah.
So, me personally, I think it's a bit of a stretch, but I do think it is a harbinger of what might be down the line. If even you look at most trends in general, whether it's from a consumer trend, marketing trends, they tend to start in markets like LA and New York, and then they work their way towards the middle of the country. Maybe that plays out here in a similar fashion,
Right.
but it could take 5 to 10 years.
Right. I mean, I think there is a message. I mean, I think the New York City race. I mean, look, we always talk about that. Sometimes you get weird results in primaries, and obviously he caught on. It's interesting because I never really focused on the item of chicken with rice, but that apparently is the item you get at a halal cart in New York City. And if you saw the video, I actually seen it. It was a very creative idea about why is chicken with rice now $11 instead of $9, and it was because the owners of these halal carts have to pay very high licensing fees. But he tapped into this thing that's now a word in the last couple of weeks, is affordability. And I think that message that says to a lot of people, look, things have gotten expensive because, New York City is an interesting place. We all, John lived in New York for a little while. I'm originally a New Yorker. Look, New York, we think of New York City, we think of Manhattan. And we think of, the skyscrapers and the beautiful apartments and all the things we do when we go to New York City. And I know, Rafe, you're in New York City a lot for work as well. But New York City is Queens and Brooklyn and Staten Island and the Bronx. And there's a lot of people who live there, and a lot of people are struggling. And
It speaks to maybe some themes that we might see play out. And I think you bring up a good point there, Eric. I mean, and I lived in New York for 9 years, and like you said, I'm still there frequently. But the themes that resonated, and I think this is where Mamdani's a great politician, right? He knows how to speak to the populace. He knows how to deliver a very articulate message, and he's a pretty good debater, right? And he was going up against like some candidates that were not really strong candidates. Right? So he had great timing, and he really knew how to deliver that message, and he had an amazing ground game knocking on doors. The message, and it appears that there's a populist message that is ready to be received. Affordability for housing, right? You have the beginnings, and of course, and what relates to that is any kind of inflation, right? Because inflation is factoring into the housing being unaffordable and the cost of food, like you talked about, whether it's in a halal cart or the price of groceries, or talking about like free grocery stores for people. We'll see if that gets past the New York legislature, right? But AI as well, and jobs. And people are feeling insecure about jobs. They're feeling insecure about the cost of living, and they're insecure about things like how do they feed their families.
Right.
He tapped into that. He delivered a solution to those people, and they voted for him for it. Whether those solutions actually come to fruition, TBD, but that is probably a harbinger of some of the messaging that we're going to see, I think, in 26 and 28.
John, you're in part of business leadership now. I mean, what are you seeing, like, for the businesses that you advise now? And I mean, how are they looking at the economy? What are they looking at an issue like that?
Well, I think that, you look at the businesses, they're most concerned about all the different things that are taking place and the disruption in the business marketplace. So, for example, since 2022, we've been in a financing recession. Okay, there haven't been IPOs, there haven't been private equity fundings, and there haven't been venture capital funding. So the whole financing stack is broken. On the other hand, you've got this incredible focus on cloud and AI, as well as along those lines, data centers. And that's propping up the market. And so companies are very concerned. Companies, for those outside of that space, they've struggled. The consulting firms have, not done as well as they would like. And anyone, again, involved in investing has not seen the returns outside of the stock market. And so it's really interesting of this dichotomy between the stock market and everything else. So there is a level of uncertainty that is compounded by tariffs that is not a good recipe for success when it comes to what businesses need, which is stability and predictability. And so they're not seeing that right now.
Right, and it's interesting because that gives us really an opportunity to kind of transition. I think it was clear that the message got to the president that said there are issues out there, and this affordability issue is one of them. And one of the first things he did, post election, was to roll back tariffs. And for those of us who've sort of looked at this issue and talked about it over the last 6 months, I mean, the president's view of the international trade system was that of America's getting abused by all these other countries. And while one can argue whether or not that makes sense or not, the fact of the matter is by imposing these level of tariffs, only so much could be absorbed by the businesses.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like our trade deficit is down technically.
Right.
So, great. Like the administration can maybe tout the fact that the trade deficit is down, but like what we would really want to see there is it's down because are less goods coming into the country, right? It's not like we're shipping more goods out of the country and we're generating all this revenue by doing that. Right? It's the deficit's down because there's less coming in. If anything, that could be more of a sign of an unhealthy consumer that's just buying less imports, right? Like ideally, we almost want to see imports flat, and we want to see exports going way up, because there's more like of a level playing field because of the tariffs. So if that's maybe one of the goals of the tariffs, it's not saying it's the only goal. If that's one of the goals of the tariffs, we're not really seeing that yet. Are the tariffs generating revenue? Yes, they are generating revenue. Like that's definitely happening. But are the tariffs bringing back manufacturing to the U.S.?
Right.
Maybe not. Like there's some nice headline deals that the administration can tout, but what I think you're also seeing that a lot of people aren't commenting on, and Jonathan, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, or if you've seen any of it in the work that you do, is where you have a lot of these companies and with globalization and production being done all over the world and parts of or assembly being sent back and forth to the US multiple times, businesses are realizing, well, they don't want to have to pay a tariff more than once. They won't have to pay a tariff 10 times because something that they're producing gets sent to the US and then back to another country and then back to the US and then back to another country before it ultimately lands in the hands of a consumer. So they're just saying, well, you know what? We're just going to produce it all overseas and then pay the tariff once as opposed to paying it multiple times. We're not seeing more decisions where the businesses say, well, you know what? It's cheaper to just produce it in the US.
Yeah, look, I think that there are some industries that have become more prevalent in the U.S. Chip manufacturing, which was never here at all. Okay, data centers, infrastructure. So you are starting to see some building out of some of these things that are kind of national priorities. But outside of that, I mean, this is a very complicated issue. And, you talk about car companies or TV manufacturers where, there's 20, 50 different components that are going into there. So it's a really complicated area. What I haven't seen is, and we did, when I was at EY, we advised people all the time, companies all the time on this. And, we thought there'd be more companies moving to Mexico, for example, and trying to, take advantage of the trade rules there. Well, we didn't see a lot of that. There really hasn't been any trend. I think it's too early to see what's going on, but I think that it's pretty clear that we're not generating a lot more jobs from this in the U.S., and I really don't think that's ever going to happen. I mean, there is a focus. There's a lot of deals being done where companies are moving their manufacturing facilities here, but I just don't know if it's going to be, have an impact the way that technology and AI and cloud is going to have in the U.S.
And it's not an easy like juggling act, like trying to get more manufacturing in the U.S. And I think governors are fighting that same kind of battle too, Eric. Right, where it's like they want to bring jobs to their state, and but at the same time they're trying to juggle or have a balancing act of like how they were elected, like appealing to their base. And I think Shapiro is kind of going through this locally here in Pennsylvania, where he's obviously a Democratic governor, right? Most Democrats tend to lean green and focus on sustainability, but there are a lot of jobs in Pennsylvania that are related to energy.
Right.
And he had to kind of walk a tightrope recently with maintaining energy jobs and looking towards the future so that he could get a budget passed.
Yeah, and I think that's, I think, look, it's very interesting because I had a conversation, I think that we talked about this a few episodes ago with a state senator who said, I said, what's the solution to this budget impasse? And he says he just has to walk away from this regional greenhouse gas project. And the problem is he doesn't want to do that because, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is, very focused on climate change. And, climate change is real and it's a problem. But at some point, he had to get a budget done. And that was the thing that he needed to compromise with the Republican senators, most of whom are the leaders, or most of them from kind of the energy belt of Pennsylvania out kind of the Southwest. So, that's an interesting, I think in some ways, and there was, I saw an editorial cartoon this week kind of criticizing the governor, on giving up on that initiative. And, I think that was the point there. On the other hand, as someone who I think has serious, 2028 ambitions, he's moving to the center. And he's saying, look, I'm going to be practical about this. And I'm glad, because the truth is, and we talked about this in the last episode, is that budget impasse really was starting to look bad. And so by solving that, it allows him to move forward. And I must tell you, he is the ever-ready bunny. He is everywhere all at once. I don't know, John, if you nationally, he was on College Game Day because he's a Pitt parent, and College Game Day was at Pitt this week. It's really quite fun as someone, who knows the governor and served on his transition team. It's fun to watch him do what he's doing, but I also see the politics of this, which is, trying to get to the center. Hey, John, speaking of governors, your governor is term limited, Mr. Youngkin. What do you think? Is he someone who's going to throw his hat in the ring for 28?
Boy, my sense is he really wants to, and it's just a question of when how he positions himself. But I think he's struggling right now to find that toehold in the Republican Party because of the influence of Trump and his successors, whether it's Vance or Rubio or someone else. And there doesn't seem to be any sort of group right now that is coming out. It doesn't seem like Nikki Haley is talking about running in 28. And I just saw a poll that said only 2% of the people, would support that. Then again, her name hasn't been out there. So Youngkin, I think, is kind of hanging around the hoop, waiting to see if there's a lane for him. And I think that lane would be, kind of more of the conservative values, focusing on constitutional rights and security, economic growth. He's a former private equity senior executive from Carlyle. He's a very religious guy, and so my guess is he would appeal to to that part of the party. But I think he's just kind of waiting right now, and I don't think he has a lane. And it's just a question of what happens. Does the next 2 years show that as Trump becomes a lame duck, that there's other sides of the conversation that come from the Republican Party? Or will it be that there's such a lock right now, even if it's Vance or Rubio or someone else, that he's just never going to get a case? My sense is he will have an opportunity at some point in time, and he'll run with that as much as possible. And my guess is he will try to run unless it just looks like it's just never going to happen, and he's going to bide his time until 2032.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I do think that if you're kind of a non-MAGA Republican, it probably makes sense to kind of stay out of the 28 race. The sense I have, and again, things change in politics, is it's looking like there's going to be this coalescence around kind of a Vance-Rubio ticket. In other words, J.D. Vance moving up to president, Rubio moving up to VP, and that if I'm a Nikki Haley, if I'm a Glenn Youngkin, I'm probably staying out of the way. And I'm not that I'm hoping for a Democratic victory, but I'm hoping that by 32, which again is not that far off, there's a lane for a a non-MAGA Republican, or whether or not MAGA, like the Tea Party, starts to recede a little bit in the case of the Republican Party. I don't know. As you guys know, I was a Republican most of my life. I left the party, 2 years ago to run for Attorney General. I don't know what's going to be left. But I hear what you're saying, and I think for him, I also think these days is that running for president is its own cottage industry. You give speeches, you write a book, you tour around, you meet lots of people, and in the end, if you don't get the nomination, maybe you're a cabinet secretary. If your party wins, you're set up for a cabinet position, or maybe you're the VP nominee. J.D. Vance being a senator, former senator, vice president. Everyone looks to governors as sort of a solid running mate.
Eric, is this your way of telling us you have a book coming out in the near future? Is there
Well, I wrote the first chapter during the pandemic, and I haven't gotten beyond it. But there is an outline in my jewelry box that I told my children about. So,
well, speaking of the pandemic, I think I don't think there's been as much wine consumption done since the pandemic. I read recently that consumption's down in a significant way. They're actually like the vineyards in California, like the most prominent region in the U.S. They are just ripping up tons and tons of acreage there because of a lack of demand. A lot of that stems from millennials and Gen Zers just drinking less writ large, but when they are drinking different things than wine. But for the boomers on this call and the Gen Xers like myself, we're still enjoying plenty of wine. And John, I know you were recently in Sicily, and Sicilian wine is pretty interesting because it has it's an island off of Italy. Obviously, it's a volcanic region. You get high altitude wines. Most famous, in the Mount Etna region, which is really the rising star of Sicily. And you can kind of think this is an area of where like Burgundy meets the Mediterranean, and you get like real warm climate coastal wines like ripe reds, aromatic whites, a lot of dessert wines. But it's really that I think it's called like Etna Rosa that is their signature wine. And you see a lot of Nero d'Avolo that is imported into the U.S. But when you were over there, did you get a chance to tour any vineyards and experience firsthand some of this delicious Sicilian juice?
Absolutely. I've been on a wine journey ever since I retired, and I try to educate myself. And of course, what I've learned is I'll never be educated well enough to wine because it's too complicated. But you're talking about a place that has an incredible amount of history, fantastic food, great people, beautiful sights, and wine. And yeah, there's two different regions. So I've learned a lot about this, and being over there and spending some time before I got there. But actually, Sicily is Italy's largest wine region. I did not know that. They have 242,000 acres of vineyards, and frankly, they're known for their Marsala dessert wine. But I will tell you that the entire time I was there, I never had any Marsala wine. It wasn't something that was offered in a lot of places. But what they really have is 65 unique grape varieties.
It's crazy.
I just came back from Greece in the summer, and it's the same type of thing where they have all these varieties that you've never heard of, and so it really is a place that people don't, if they're looking for a Pinot or a Cabernet, they're not going to find it here, and so you really have to be educated. So I would tell you that so there's two regions. There's the Mount Etna region, and like you said, they have the Etna Rosso, which is essentially this wine called Nerello Mascalese.
Good pronunciation there. I didn't want to go there with the formal pronunciation.
So in Spanish it would be Nerello Mascalese, but it is in Italian it's Nerello Mascalese, as I learned, and that one is, and then there's a white called Caricante, which they both come. So one of them is Rosso, is Etna Bianco, and one of them is Etna Rosso. And then you have another region, which is the southeast part, which is near a town called Ragusa, which we visited, and that is where Nero d'Avola comes from. And I would say that you're right. Like if you had asked me what the main wine is, I would have said Nero d'Avola. And I would tell you, so Nero d'Avola is a wine that is medium to high tannins. They compare it. It's been compared to the Cabernet Sauvignon, but I would tell you that it is more similar to a Malbec. I don't think it has the level of tannins and acidity that a Cabernet has, especially one from California. And so I like that wine, but I really fell in love with Nerello Mascalese. It's tannic, it's acidic, it's very mineralic because it's on the slopes of Mount Etna. It looks like a Pinot. It's a lighter shade, but it tasted more like a northern Italian wine, like a Barolo or Nebbiolo.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like with that volcanic soil, you get that high minerality and high acid, but in a real elegant way. And I think that's why, like when I think of Burgundian wines, I really just think of like balanced elegance. And because of the climate combined with the unique soil in Sicily and the diversity of soil there, the winemakers really get a chance to produce a nice, balanced, elegant wine. And it can, especially with an island like Sicily where there's so much seafood, whether it's white or red, it can really cut through a seafood dish that you might be eating, like sardines. When you think about some of the Sicilian dishes that have a lot of sardines and anchovies, right? It's just a great pairing wine.
Yeah, and the Caricante, the other Etna wine, the white, has high acidity, similar to what I would call a dry Riesling, and very salty. So getting back to your point of where it balances with the salinity of the food. The other one that I liked, and there's a wine called Colorado, which they use more for a blend, but the other one I liked was a Grillo, and this one seemed to me similar to a Sauvignon Blanc, medium to high acidity, also salty, and I really enjoyed that. But overall, I really walked away with a great appreciation. Am I going to tell you that I would choose one of these reds over a Brunello? No, definitely not. Okay, but they are very nice wines. I would say they're good values. I don't think that, there's some wines like in Spain, the Riojas wines, that are really, really great values. A Malbec is a great value. I'm not sure I would see these in that same place, but they are absolutely cheaper and a better value than some of the mainstream Cabernet Sauvignons and obviously Sangioveses and things like that from Italy.
Right, you're not going to pay as much as you might for like a Super Tuscan from Bulgari or a Barolo or a Barbaresco up north in Piedmont, and certainly not for a Brunello or an Amarone. But you maybe are in an in-between area between those wines and then the real high value wines that you might see, like you said, Spain or Argentina, Mendoza, Malbecs, or like nice Rioja from Spain, that you're going to get great value on. Are there any producers that you want to give a shout out to that you either sampled or went to their vineyard that like we can maybe find here in the States or get shipped to the States?
So, I visited several vineyards. They all have these things called contradas, where they all actually have their own vineyards as part of this one little section, and so they all actually use those names when you see the wine. The one that I visited that I really liked, and coincidentally, I was in a restaurant the week before I left, and I had this same wine. And when I was setting up my visit to the vineyards, I actually specifically asked to go. So it's called Girolamo Russo. So Girolamo. I love their wines. I bought some. I really thought they were good. There is only one. So the designations in Italy, they're DOC and then DOCG. So I think there's quite a few DOCs there. A lot of them are on the slopes of Mount Etna. There's only one DOCG, and it is called a Sarasuolo di Vittoria. And I actually tasted one of those. It is a Nero d'Avola blended with Frappato. I really enjoyed that. So that was from a vineyard called Patri, Patri. And by the way, I just want to finish up by saying, and coming back to politics, is when I got home, I got an email from the shipper, and it said, before we ship this, you need to pay us a 15% tariff. And so I had to pay. I thought that I had settled this before I left, but I had to pay a 15% tariff. So if people don't think that they're being affected directly by these tariffs, this is an example of it. You haven't seen that as much in the U.S., where it's been eaten along the supply chain, but here was an example where I bought wines directly and I had to pay 15%.
It's a real thing. It happens. And just a reminder, we've talked about this in past episodes, but DOC and DOCG are just the regulatory bodies in Italy. And when you see that for the Italian wines, you're going to see it at the top of the bottle where the cork is, and you'll see the little wraparound label. When you see DOC or DOCG, it just means that the producer followed the strict guidelines of those regulatory bodies. DOC is a pretty good stamp of approval. DOCG is just like one level, one notch up above that, and that ranges from everything to make sure that they're using all the grapes from that specific region to aging the wine for a certain amount of time. In certain cases, they can only use certain barrels, whether it's first use, second use, steel versus oak. So it is to protect the brand integrity of that region. So when a wine consumer drinks wine from Sicily, and in this case the Mount Etna region, they know what they're getting. Interestingly, we don't really have that in the U.S. It's almost buyer beware. You could be drinking a Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley, allegedly, and it could be 15% Merlot, and you don't even realize you're drinking a little bit of Merlot when you're drinking a Cabernet Sauvignon. Let's do closing remarks, because I think we covered a lot this episode. Certainly a lot of Sicilian wine. Eric, anything you want to say to take us away?
So thinking about wine, obviously next week is Thanksgiving. I like to always talk about the fact that as we come to the holiday season, Thanksgiving is the quintessential American holiday. If you are an American or you live in America, you feel incredibly lucky to be here, and it's a holiday you can celebrate with your family and your friends. For those of us, who are Jewish, Christmas obviously is a holiday we enjoy watching, but it can't be ours. But Thanksgiving, and for people of other religions, it also as well. But Thanksgiving is for everyone. And so as we head into that season, I just want to wish you guys, wonderful, happy Thanksgiving. And it's been great to be able to do this with you guys.
And we're grateful to have John Shames as our first special guest on Pinot and Policy. Thank you, John, for joining us. Really appreciate it. The amazing insights that you provided, and hopefully we can come back and do this again. Maybe,
John,
maybe
let us know when your next wine trip is, and we'll have you on for. Where's the next wine region you're going?
I'm going to New Zealand and Australia in January, February. So I'll be doing a couple wine tasting tours there in I think the Yarra Valley. I'm trying to set up outside of Melbourne. And then there's various wine regions in South Island, New Zealand.
Well, so I see episode 15 or 16 with John Shames telling us
bring me back. I'll take a bottle of Grange, please, John.
Grange, okay.
Anyway, John, thanks so much for joining us. Rafe, thanks. And thanks to everybody listening. Please comment. Please tell us what you like, what you don't like. And as a reminder, my views are not the views of Royer Cooper, Cohn, and Braunfeld, similar to Rafe and similar to John. These are our personal views, but it's great to be able to share them with everybody, and have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Remember to like and follow. Happy Thanksgiving.